They shamed me for being a waitress, but gasped when my simple date stood up and told the truth. I've never been ashamed of being a waitress. It's honest work, and I'm proud of how hard I've fought to stay afloat. But at my sister's wedding, surrounded by designer dresses and judgmental eyes, my job suddenly made me invisible, or worse, laughable. Before we move further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for heartwarming stories like this. Likewise, tell us where you are watching from in the comment below. The venue was breathtaking. The soft glow of chandeliers bathed the room in warm light, while the walls were adorned with extravagant flowers that seemed to bloom in shades of blush pink and ivory. The guests were a blur of polished shoes, sparkling jewelry, and faces painted with bright smiles. Their laughter mixed with the sound of clinking glasses, creating an atmosphere that was meant to feel magical. But all I could focus on was the difference between me and them. I stood there, in the entrance, wearing a simple yet elegant dress that I'd spent weeks saving up for, hoping it would blend in. I looked good, or at least I tried. My shoes, polished and neatly chosen, clacked softly against the marble floor as I walked into the reception. I held my head up, taking slow, deliberate steps, but no matter how I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. It wasn't just the glistening gowns and tuxedos, it was the look in people's eyes as they watched me make my way through the crowd. The whispers began almost immediately, subtle at first, like an undercurrent too quiet to be heard but too strong to ignore. As I passed by a group of women sipping champagne, one of them glanced at me, her gaze sharp and quick, then whispered something to her friend. A soft giggle followed, and I could feel my face flush. I tried not to let it bother me. I tried to act like I belonged, as if I wasn't aware of the stares. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it gnawed at me. I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down, a cold hand on my chest that wouldn't let go. I wasn't dressed in the way they were, didn't have the same confidence or status. I wasn't part of their world. And worse, I wasn't part of my sister's world either. I kept my eyes forward, ignoring the whispers, until I saw her, my sister, the bride, standing with a group of guests near the stage. Her perfect white dress sparkled under the lights as she greeted each guest, laughing in a way that sounded rehearsed, like she was performing in a play where everyone knew their lines. She saw me, but her gaze didn't linger for long. There was no warmth, no sign of the love we once shared as kids. She nodded quickly, then turned back to the conversation, as if I were just another face in the crowd. But that wasn't what hurt the most. No, the worst part came when she made her way toward me. "Glad you could make it," she said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "Did you get here early to serve the drinks or something?" The words hit me like a slap to the face. They weren't loud, but they were sharp, cutting through the laughter and music in the background. I could feel every eye in the room flick to me, every breath drawn in as the moment hung in the air. Her words, casual and cutting, sank deep into my chest. I tried to force a smile, a polite response that would let her know I wasn't affected, but my mouth felt dry. I didn't know how to respond. There was no joking or light-hearted comeback that could erase what she'd just said. My hands tightened around the glass of water I was holding, and my posture shifted. I was suddenly smaller, as if the room had grown too big for me to fit in. "Come on, it's fine," she said, as though trying to cover up the awkwardness with a laugh. "You know I'm just kidding. It's your job, right?" And just like that, the room seemed to hold its breath. I could hear the faint murmurs of laughter, more pronounced now. I could feel their eyes on me. The guests who had once been too busy mingling to care about my presence now focused on me, the waitress, at a wedding that was too glamorous for someone like me. In that moment, I wasn't a sister or a guest. I was the hired help, the one who didn't belong. And they all knew it. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to leave, to run away from the stares and the judgment, but I couldn't. I couldn't let them see that it hurt, that their words had cut through me, leaving a mark. So I stood there, trying to hold it together, my smile frozen on my face. The music played on, the laughter continued, but it felt like the room had closed in on me. My sister had said what everyone else had been thinking. No one had to speak the words aloud. The way they looked at me, like I didn't belong, said it all. I quickly made my way to the nearest table, hoping to find a quiet corner to settle into, but the weight of the moment followed me. It felt like everyone knew. I wasn't just the sister of the bride, I was the outsider. The one who had worked her way through life without the luxury of designer clothes or fancy invitations. The one who had fought for everything. But in that room, with all its elegance and perfection, none of that mattered. I sat down at the table, a distant smile on my face, as the guests around me continued to laugh, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. The contrast was undeniable. They were the picture of perfection, while I was just a waitress in a simple dress. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't proud of my work. I was ashamed. The reception was in full swing. The grand ballroom, once filled with the whispers of anticipation, now buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of a live band playing gentle background music. The air was thick with the scent of freshly prepared food, and the guests were enjoying themselves, their voices rising in excitement as they tasted the dishes and complimented the bride's choice of every exquisite detail. I sat quietly at my table, not far from the dance floor but just out of reach of the spotlight. The seat felt too big, too empty, as if the space between me and the guest was growing wider with each passing moment. I wasn't sure why I felt this way. I wasn't the center of attention. I wasn't even trying to be. But something in the air, perhaps the too perfect laughter or the shine of designer heels on polished floors, reminded me of what I wasn't. I poked at my food with a fork, letting my mind wander. Every bite felt like it didn't belong in my mouth, like I had somehow wandered into this perfect moment when I wasn't invited. Despite my best efforts to focus on the meal, the laughter from the other tables kept rising, filling the room with an energy that felt foreign to me. They weren't laughing at anything particularly funny, but they all laughed just the same. It was a kind of laughter that seemed to mean more than joy. It seemed to signal a shared understanding, a camaraderie that had always excluded me. Then, I felt it, the unmistakable silence that accompanies a bride's entrance into the room to give her speech. I watched my sister rise from her seat, the spotlight instantly falling on her as she adjusted the delicate train of her dress. It was everything I'd imagined, flawless, bright white, and perfect in every sense. She moved like someone accustomed to this kind of attention. She had always been the golden child, the one who knew how to play the part, who could walk into any room and command the gaze of every person in it. And for a moment, I wished I could just blend into the crowd, out of sight, out of mind. But there was no escaping it. Not now. She adjusted the microphone, the elegant glass of champagne in her hand catching the light as she took a sip, her smile wide and full of anticipation. "Thank you all so much for coming," she began, her voice sweet, practiced, like she had rehearsed this speech countless times before. "I know I'm incredibly lucky to have found someone as wonderful as my husband, and I'm so glad you're all here to share this special day with us." Her words were kind, warm even, but it wasn't long before I could feel the shift, a subtle but unmistakable change in her tone as she continued. She cleared her throat and took a dramatic pause, her eyes scanning the room. "And of course, I have to thank my amazing family," she said, her eyes landing briefly on me. "Especially my sister, who's here with us today. Now, I know she's been a bit busy lately," she paused, that sly grin spreading across her face. "I'm sure she was probably just taking a break from serving us all, right? Or maybe she was sneaking in a little time off from being, well, one of the help." I froze. The words seemed to hang in the air, as if suspended by some invisible force. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought maybe I'd misheard her, or perhaps she was joking, as she often did. But when the audience laughed, light, almost too light to be innocent, I realized it wasn't a mistake. The words were deliberate. The laughter was too. I could feel the heat rising to my face, the sting of her remarks settling deep into my chest. It wasn't funny. It wasn't funny at all. But she laughed it off, tossing her head back with a carefree chuckle, as if it were the most innocent thing in the world. Her voice continued to rise, her words flowing effortlessly as if they were just a part of the routine she had done so many times before. The crowd joined in, their laughter flowing in perfect rhythm with hers. But to me, it was like an audible slap, echoing around me in slow motion, each laugh carving a deeper wound. I could feel every eye in the room on me now. They weren't just looking at me, they were judging me, like my sister had given them permission to. Her words, though dressed up in humor, were cutting, and it was clear that she hadn't thought for 1 second about what they might do to me. She was so caught up in her perfect little world that she didn't see the damage she was causing. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to stand up and leave, to flee from the room and the biting laughter that had become a second skin for me. But I stayed, frozen in my seat. I couldn't let them see how much it hurt. I forced a smile, my lips trembling with the effort. But deep down, the damage had already been done. I knew this wasn't just a one-time slip. This was who she was. This was how she saw me, how she had always seen me. No matter how much I worked, no matter how much I fought for every inch of my life, I would always be the one who wasn't quite good enough. The one who was always just a little bit out of place. As the laughter continued, I looked down at my plate, pretending to focus on the food in front of me, as though I could lose myself in the simple comfort of a meal. I tried to ignore the heaviness in my chest, the knot in my stomach that tightened with each passing second. I tried to convince myself that it didn't matter, that she was just being playful, just trying to make the day a little lighter. But the truth was harder to face. She had done it deliberately. Her remark wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was a message. And it was aimed at me. I looked around the room, trying to ignore the voices, the laughter, the weight of judgment that seemed to be pressing in from all sides. But it was impossible. The more I tried to push it away, the more it felt like the walls were closing in. I was the only one who could see through the thin veil of her joke. Everyone else, family, friends, acquaintances, was too busy laughing along, too caught up in the moment to realize how deeply it cut. In the middle of all that laughter, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. My sister had always seen me as less than. No matter how many hours I worked, no matter how much I strived to improve myself, I would never be in her world. And, for the first time in my life, I wondered if I was fooling myself, thinking that I belonged at all. I sat at my table, the weight of my sister's words still lingering in the air, heavy and suffocating. The guests around me were enjoying themselves, their laughter ringing through the ballroom, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I tried to smile, tried to focus on my food, but the tension in the room was unbearable. My sister's mockery was still echoing in my ears, in the faces of the guests. Some filled with quiet judgment, others with barely concealed amusement, only made things worse. Then, I felt a gentle tap on my hand. I looked up, startled, to find the face of my date, someone I had met a few months ago at a cafe. His name was Ethan, and despite the way he blended into the background, there was something about him that had always drawn me in. He wasn't flashy or loud. He didn't wear a designer suit or speak with the kind of polished confidence that most of the men in this room exuded. But in a room full of grandeur, Ethan's quiet presence was like a breath of fresh air. He was dressed in a simple suit, nothing extravagant, just a dark gray jacket and trousers that fit him well. His tie was modest, his shoes clean but not polished to a mirror's shine. Compared to the tuxedos and cocktail dresses around us, he was a stark contrast. His appearance was unassuming, almost humble, but there was an undeniable calmness about him. He sat back in his chair, his hands folded casually in front of him, observing the room without any visible discomfort. There was a stillness in his gaze, a kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to be loud or showy to be powerful. As I tried to push my sister's words out of my mind, I noticed how Ethan's eyes never left me. He hadn't said much since we'd sat down, but I could tell he was keenly aware of the tension swirling around us. The way the guests giggled behind their glasses, the way their conversations seemed to always find their way back to the help in the room. He noticed it all. But unlike me, he didn't shrink into his seat or let the discomfort consume him. Instead, he watched with an air of quiet observation, as though he had seen this kind of thing before and knew exactly how to handle it. The mocking from my sister continued, but Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't even glance toward the stage, where the attention was still firmly fixed on my sister. Instead, he reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine gently. The touch was simple, warm, and without hesitation. His hand, calloused but steady, offered a quiet comfort amidst the chaos. "You okay?" he whispered, his voice low but calm, like he was asking me to trust him without saying a word more. I nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. There was something about his presence that immediately grounded me, but I still felt the sting of my sister's words. It wasn't easy to shake off the feeling of being the outsider, of being the one who didn't belong in this room. I had worked so hard to get here, but now that I was, it felt like I was just a spectator in my own life. Ethan, however, seemed unaffected by the tension that suffocated the room. His eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that I hadn't seen in a long time, a genuine care. Not the kind of care that was offered out of obligation or pity, but the kind that came from a place of knowing. He didn't need to ask if I was okay, he could tell I wasn't. But more importantly, he didn't need to fix it. He wasn't here to make things better in some grand, sweeping way. He was here to simply be with me, to offer comfort in the smallest, most quiet ways. As the laughter continued from the tables around us, I realized that Ethan wasn't bothered by the opinions of others. His calmness didn't come from a place of indifference, it came from an inner peace that I envied. He didn't need to impress anyone. He didn't need to prove anything. He was enough as he was, and that confidence in his simplicity was something I had never fully appreciated until this moment. "Let it go," he said softly, his thumb brushing the back of my hand, grounding me further. "None of this matters." I didn't fully understand what he meant, but his words resonated with me. In a world so obsessed with appearances, with status, with wealth, Ethan seemed to have no need for any of it. His presence in this world of opulence was like a reminder that sometimes the most important things weren't the things we could see or touch. It was the unspoken connection between people, the kindness in a quiet touch, the warmth of someone who didn't care about how they were perceived. As I sat there, listening to the distant laughter and watching the guests around us continue to enjoy their conversations, something in me began to shift. The weight of judgment I had felt earlier started to lessen, not because it disappeared, but because Ethan had made me realize something I hadn't seen before. I didn't have to play their game. I didn't have to care what they thought about me. I wasn't defined by their opinions. And neither was he. I glanced up at Ethan, meeting his steady gaze. For the first time since I arrived, I felt a glimmer of hope. There was still beauty in this moment, in the simplicity of being with someone who saw me, who didn't look at me as an outsider, but as someone worth knowing. His eyes narrowed slightly as he glanced toward the stage, where my sister was still making her speech, her words dancing with sarcasm and amusement. I couldn't help but notice the change in his demeanor. It was subtle, but there was a shift in his posture. His jaw tightened just slightly, and his gaze hardened for the briefest of moments. It was as if something inside him had clicked, something protective, something fierce. Ethan wasn't the type to make a scene, but there was an intensity in the way he looked at the stage, a quiet preparation for something important. I couldn't quite place it, but I had a feeling that the next few moments would change everything. As I sat there, hand in hand with the man who had quietly turned my world upside down, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. The reception was in full swing, the hum of chatter and laughter reverberating through the grand ballroom. Guests mingled, exchanging pleasantries, their glasses clinking with toasts and congratulations. My sister, the bride, stood at the center of it all, her smile bright, her laughter infectious, as she reveled in the attention. Everything seemed perfect, every detail meticulously planned. But for me, the night had already soured. My sister's earlier comments still stung, and no matter how much I tried to brush them off, the weight of her mockery lingered like a shadow over my shoulder. I glanced down at my plate, picking at the remnants of my dinner, trying to focus on anything other than the laughter that seemed to surround me. Ethan, sitting beside me, was calm as always. His hand still rested on mine, his presence quiet yet unwavering. I could feel his comfort, the steadiness he exuded, but my mind kept drifting back to the hurtful words my sister had thrown at me. Her jab at my job had been more than just a passing remark. It had been a declaration, a public reminder that, to her, I was still the help, the one who would always be beneath her. But then, without warning, something shifted. I felt a soft pressure on my hand as Ethan stood up from the table, his movement slow, deliberate. I looked up at him, confused. I hadn't expected him to leave the table, especially not in the middle of all the excitement. He didn't say a word, but there was a quiet resolve in his expression. He straightened his suit jacket with a calm that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. My heart skipped a beat as I watched him move across the room, his steps measured and steady. The noise in the room began to fade, replaced by a sudden hush. People paused in mid-conversation, their heads turning toward Ethan, unsure of what was happening. There was a ripple of uncertainty in the air, an unspoken question floating between the guests. What was he doing? I watched, breathless, as Ethan reached the center of the room, standing in front of the microphone that had been set up for speeches and announcements. The guests around me shifted in their seats, curiosity piqued. My sister, still caught in a conversation with a few of her friends, didn't immediately notice the shift in the atmosphere. But soon enough, she turned to look, her smile faltering as she saw Ethan standing before the microphone. For a brief moment, there was nothing but silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I felt a knot of nerves tighten in my stomach, a mix of confusion and apprehension flooding me. Why was he standing there? What was he about to do? Ethan cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the quiet like a warm breeze. I'd like to say a few words, he began, his tone polite but carrying an undercurrent of something more serious. His gaze swept over the room, taking in the faces that had turned toward him with a mix of curiosity and mild skepticism. At first, his words were simple, unassuming. I want to start by congratulating the bride and groom, he said, a smile in his voice. It's an honor to be here, to witness such a beautiful moment. His voice, steady and calm, held the attention of the room, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to relax. But then, his tone shifted. It was subtle at first, but there was a clear change in the way he spoke, more serious, more deliberate. The guests leaned in, sensing something was coming. "But there's something you all need to know about me," he said, his eyes locking onto mine for just a second. The tension in the room grew palpable, as if everyone was waiting for the next words to drop. My heart raced. What was he doing? Was this some sort of joke? Ethan's gaze flickered briefly to the crowd before continuing. "I'm not just some ordinary man. In fact, I'm not who most of you think I am." He paused, letting his words sink in. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd as people exchanged confused glances. "I am the CEO of a successful tech company," he continued, his voice unwavering. "I've been quietly living under the radar, not because I'm ashamed of what I've achieved, but because I believe in letting my work speak for itself." A stunned silence fell over the room. The guests exchanged looks, disbelief and curiosity written on their faces. I felt the blood drain from my face, my stomach dropping. What was he saying? Why was he saying this now? "I'm not here to boast," Ethan went on, his words measured, "but I felt it was time for the truth to come out. You see, I'm not just a humble man in a simple suit. I've built my life from the ground up, and I've done it without the need to flaunt my wealth or status." He glanced toward my sister, whose expression had shifted from confusion to something darker, her jaw slowly dropping as the weight of his words sank in. "And I'm not here to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but there's something I've learned in my life," he continued. "It's not the clothes we wear, the jobs we hold, or the titles we claim that define us. It's who we are as people, and it's the kindness, the integrity, and the respect we show one another that truly matter." The room was dead silent, the gravity of his revelation sinking in. The air felt thick with disbelief, and I could almost hear the collective gasps of realization. I looked at my sister, her face frozen in shock. I could see the cogs turning in her mind as she processed the words he had just spoken. Her jaw was still hanging open, her eyes darting from Ethan to me and back again, as if trying to reconcile the man who had been quietly sitting next to me with the man standing before them, revealing himself as a millionaire CEO. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence stretch, before he finally spoke again. "I think that's all I have to say. I'm just a man who believes in letting people be who they are. And I think, maybe, we could all stand to be a little more real with each other." With that, he turned and walked back toward me, his calm presence somehow making the world feel just a little more grounded. As he returned to his seat, the guests were still processing, their faces a mix of shock, confusion, and awe. The silence lingered a little longer before the room slowly began to hum again, but something had shifted. I could feel it in the air, in the way the guests now looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. And my sister? Her face was a study in disbelief as she sat, frozen in her chair, unable to hide her surprise. She had never expected this. Neither had I. But somehow, in that moment, everything had changed. The mockery was gone, replaced by the kind of respect that could only come with the truth. The atmosphere in the room had shifted in a way I couldn't quite put into words. Moments ago, it had been filled with laughter and judgment, the kind of superficial chatter that seemed to revolve around appearances and status. Now, a stunned silence hung heavy in the air. The guests, who had once dismissed Ethan with nothing but disdain, were suddenly captivated by his every word. Ethan stood at the microphone, speaking in a calm, unwavering voice, but there was a fire in his eyes that had never been there before. He wasn't just revealing his wealth. He was revealing a part of himself that had remained hidden for so long. And as he spoke, the faces around the room began to change. "I didn't inherit my success," Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. "I built it. From nothing. It wasn't easy. It took years of hard work, sacrifice, and failure. But through all of it, I never forgot where I came from, and I never let my success define who I am." As the words left his mouth, I could feel the shift in the room. The guests, once indifferent or mocking, were now hanging on to every syllable. Their whispers, once full of judgment, were replaced by murmurs of disbelief. Eyes widened, and some even leaned in to get a better look at the man who had quietly stood in the background until now. The realization was like a slow wave, rising steadily as Ethan continued. "I'm here because I value hard work, integrity, and humility," he said, his gaze briefly meeting mine. "And that's why I'm with her," he added, gesturing to me with a subtle nod. "I didn't fall for her because of her job or her title. I fell for her because of who she is. Her heart. Her spirit. That's what matters. I could feel the heat of the room shift toward me, and my cheeks flushed with a mixture of surprise, gratitude, and confusion. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he spoke them. There was no pretension in his tone, no hint of arrogance. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He was simply stating the truth. And as he spoke, I felt a strange warmth spread through me, like I was finally being seen for the person I really was, not the job I held or the status I lacked. I could see the guests around us, frozen in disbelief. Some were wide-eyed, others had their mouths slightly agape, struggling to process what they had just heard. It was as if the very foundations of their assumptions had been shattered in an instant. I watched my sister's face as she tried to reconcile the man she had just mocked with the man standing before her now. Her expression shifted from confusion to guilt, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. She was realizing, far too late, that she had judged him, and me, based on nothing but appearances. The camera panned across the room, capturing the stunned faces of the guests. A few were whispering to each other in hushed tones, exchanging shocked glances, while others sat motionless, unable to process the truth unfolding before them. Some of them, who had once dismissed Ethan as just another nobody, were now questioning everything they thought they knew about the world. Ethan's words were a revelation not just about his own life, but about all of us. I'm not here to impress anyone. I don't need anyone's approval. But I believe in what truly matters, he continued, his voice unwavering. And I believe that if we stopped judging each other based on our jobs, our clothes, or our bank accounts, we'd all be a lot better off. What matters is who we are when no one's watching. As he finished speaking, there was a collective pause. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The room was frozen, caught in the tension of realization. And then, slowly, the whispers began again. But this time, they were different. They weren't filled with mockery. They were filled with awe and respect. The shift was palpable. The judgment that had once been so thick in the air was replaced by a quiet admiration. People were beginning to understand what they had once mocked. They were starting to see Ethan for who he truly was, and in doing so, they were beginning to see me too. I sat there, feeling a rush of mixed emotions. Part of me wanted to shrink away from the attention, but another part of me felt incredibly proud. Proud of Ethan for his courage to speak up, proud of myself for finding someone who valued me for the right reasons. But above all, I felt humbled. Humbled by the fact that in a room full of people who had overlooked me, Ethan had never seen me as anything less than worthy. And as I looked around, I realized something. The guests were no longer looking at us with disdain. They were looking at us with respect. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. What had once been mockery had now become admiration. The shift in the room was more than just about Ethan's wealth. It was about the truth that had been revealed, the truth about the kind of people we were, the kind of people we all could be if we stopped hiding behind the facades we built for ourselves. As the room continued to process what had just happened, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The sound of soft chatter and the clink of glasses began to return to the room, but there was an uncomfortable silence between my sister and me. After Ethan's revelation, the atmosphere had shifted entirely, but that didn't make the awkwardness of the moment disappear. I had hoped my sister would stay caught up in the whirlwind of the reception, but no. There she was, making her way toward me, her head down, her footsteps slow and hesitant. As she approached, I could feel the weight of the situation settling over me. She hadn't even reached me yet, but I already knew what was coming. The apology was inevitable. It had to be. But what kind of apology would it be? When she finally reached me, she stopped a few paces away, unable to meet my gaze. The words came out in a rush, low and almost muffled, as if she wasn't sure how to phrase them. I'm sorry, she said, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I didn't know who he really was. I didn't mean to. She paused, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her dress, clearly trying to find the right words. I nodded, waiting for her to continue, but there was something in her tone that made me wonder if she truly understood the weight of what she had said earlier. I didn't realize, that he was, that he's, him, she stammered, her eyes flickering toward Ethan, still seated at our table. I just thought he was just some guy, But I never meant to embarrass you. The apology was there, but it didn't feel as genuine as it should have. It was almost like she was apologizing for her ignorance, not for the hurt she had caused. I could hear the regret in her voice, but it was tinged with defensiveness, like she was still trying to justify herself. I took a deep breath, letting the tension wash over me. It was hard to look at her, harder still to listen to the words she was saying. I had spent my life trying to prove that I wasn't just the waitress, but someone worthy of respect, someone who had fought for everything I had. And now, standing here, I realized just how much my sister had never seen me as anything other than her little sibling, someone to be pitied or looked down upon. "Look, it's okay," I said, my voice steady but soft, trying to keep the bitterness from creeping in. "People make mistakes. I get it." But even as I spoke the words, there was a tightness in my chest, an emotion I couldn't quite name. Was it forgiveness? Or was it disappointment? Perhaps both. She met my gaze then, her eyes wide, filled with a mixture of guilt and confusion. "I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter," she said, her voice quieter now. "I thought I was just being funny, but I see now how wrong I was." The sincerity was there, but it didn't quite reach me. Maybe it was because the apology felt too late, or maybe because it was still laced with a bit of her old attitude. She was sorry, but was she sorry for mocking me, or sorry that she'd been embarrassed by Ethan's wealth? I didn't want to dwell on it. I didn't want to make her feel worse, and I certainly didn't want to drag this out longer than it had to be. So I offered her a small smile, trying my best to push my inner conflict aside. "It's all right, really," I said. "We all say things without thinking. It's no big deal." But as I spoke the words, I could feel the weight of them in my chest. The truth was, it wasn't just about the words she had said. It was about the way she had treated me for years. The way she had seen me as lesser, as someone who was just a part of the background to her perfect life. That was what hurt the most. Not the joke at the wedding, but the constant undertone of judgment that I had been living with for so long. She looked at me for a moment longer, her expression torn. And then, just like that, she seemed to gather herself, her shoulders stiffening slightly. "Thanks," she said, a touch of embarrassment still in her voice, but also something else. Something that, for the first time, felt like real regret. I'll make it up to you somehow. I promise." I nodded, forcing another smile, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. "You don't have to do anything, sis. Just be better, okay?" The words felt like they were both for her and for me. As she walked away, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. The apology was nice, but it didn't undo the years of misunderstanding. It didn't fix the way she had always seen me. I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to fully let go of that. But in that moment, I also realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about moving forward, even if that meant doing so with a heart that had been cracked, but not broken. I watched her retreat to the other side of the room, and for a moment, the tension seemed to settle. The air felt lighter, but my own heart was still heavy. It wasn't over yet, but maybe, just maybe, we could start to heal. The evening had shifted dramatically from where it began. What had started with tense, judgmental glances and whispered remarks had gradually transformed into something far more genuine and warm. The laughter and clinking of glasses were now joined by the sound of music, and the reception hall, once filled with judgment, was now alive with joy. The guests, who had once cast their sideways glances at Ethan and me, were now dancing, smiling, and congratulating the newlyweds. The air was different now, lighter, full of newfound respect. As the wedding neared its close, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me. Ethan and I stood together by the dance floor, watching the celebration unfold, but in that moment, we were in our own little world. It was as if the rest of the room had faded away, leaving just the two of us. Ethan reached for my hand, his fingers warm and reassuring as they intertwined with mine. He didn't need to say anything. His gentle touch and the look in his eyes spoke volumes. It was the kind of gaze that made you feel seen for who you truly were, not what you appeared to be. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself to smile fully, without the weight of judgment or insecurity. I realized I wasn't just standing here as someone's sister or a waitress at a fancy wedding. I was standing here as me, worthy, loved, and respected. The subtle tension that had existed between us all evening had melted away, replaced by something stronger, more profound. I felt seen not because of the money I might have, or the job I held, but because of the heart I carried. And Ethan, despite being a millionaire in the eyes of the world, wasn't defined by his wealth. He was defined by his character, his humility, his kindness, and, most of all, his respect for me. As we walked hand in hand toward the exit, the door to the outside world waiting to greet us, I noticed the change in the people around us. The cold, dismissive stares had been replaced with warm smiles. Some of the guests who had once openly mocked us now approached Ethan, shaking his hand, offering congratulations for what they now realized was a union built on something far deeper than status. The whispers had stopped, replaced with genuine admiration. The shift had been slow but unmistakable. What had once been seen as beneath them was now viewed as something to aspire to. And yet, amidst the changing perceptions, it was the quiet moments that meant the most. As we walked out of the hall together, our hands still clasped, I realized something. The evening had given me far more than just validation or acceptance from others. It had given me something far more valuable, a deeper sense of confidence in who I was. I had spent years feeling like I needed to prove myself, as if my worth was measured by others' standards. But tonight, that belief had been shattered. As the night air brushed against my face, I looked at Ethan, who was walking beside me with a quiet smile. He had never judged me. He had never needed me to be anything other than who I was. And now, as we walked into a new chapter together, I knew this was just the beginning of something far greater than either of us could have imagined. The camera pulled back as we continued walking, the bright lights of the wedding reception now fading into the distance. The world outside was wide open, full of new possibilities, full of the promise of a future built on mutual respect, love, and understanding. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Because in Ethan's eyes, and in my own, I had already proven the only thing that mattered. I was enough. As we turned the corner, the camera lingered on our faces. Ethan's smile was soft, but his eyes were full of strength, warmth, and a quiet understanding. And as I looked at him, I realized that true love, the kind that lasts, isn't defined by wealth or appearances. It's defined by the heart, by the respect you give and receive, and by the realization that sometimes, the greatest wealth isn't something you can see, it's something you feel. If you enjoyed this story, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing, heartfelt stories like this. Also, let us know where you are watching from, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.